Welcome to a journey into the past, where we'll explore captivating histories to lull you into a peaceful and enlightening sleep. Remember to subscribe and like. By the end of this lecture, you'll be fast asleep. Close your eyes and let yourself be transported to the year 323 BC, to the heart of Babylon. Imagine the scorching air, thick with the scent of exotic incense and ever-present dust. Time seems to stand still. You are in one of antiquity's most magnificent cities, the capital of a vast and flourishing empire. Your gaze rises to the majestic palaces towering over narrow streets, while barges glide lazily along the canals like slumbering serpents. At the very center of this splendor, in the opulent chambers of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, the life of a man known to the world as King of Kings, master of a great empire, ebbs away. Alexander the Great is only 32 years old, the prime of his life, yet his body is betraying him. His voice is hoarse, barely audible. Even the most skilled physicians of the time, luminaries of medicine, are powerless against the approaching death. Around his bed, like a mournful retinue, gather his loyal generals, devoted wives, courtiers, and confidants. Fear and bewilderment are etched on their faces. The question that torments each person standing by the deathbed of the great conqueror hangs heavy in the silence, like a funeral knell. What comes next? A vast empire stretching from the Balkan Peninsula to distant India is losing its ruler, and no one dares predict the future. But beyond these somber walls, in the hearts of people across the globe, his name has long since become legend. Soldiers swear oaths by his name, inspired by his exploits. Historians meticulously record his deeds, striving to preserve the truth for future generations, while his persona gradually becomes enshrouded in myths and legends, transforming into a symbol of greatness. How did the son of a Macedonian king, a pupil of the great Aristotle, a man who conquered half the known world, achieve such incredible fame, a fame that has transcended millennia? Why, even 2,000 years later, does his name remain a symbol of unparalleled greatness, inspiring people to achieve great things? Alexander didn't just win battles. He shaped history, redrew borders, and altered the course of civilization. He possessed a remarkable combination of qualities rarely found in one person: an unparalleled military talent, enabling him to achieve victory even in the most challenging circumstances; political acumen, allowing him to skillfully govern conquered territories; boundless ambition, driving him toward new conquests; and charisma that captivated even his most implacable enemies. His army, functioning as a single organism, traversed scorching deserts, impassable mountain passes, and raging rivers, never losing faith in their leader, knowing he would lead them to victory. He not only built a vast empire, expanding his dominion, but also paved the way for a new civilization where Hellenic culture, with its philosophy and art, met Eastern wisdom, creating a unique fusion. His name is ranked alongside such towering figures as Napoleon, Genghis Khan, and Julius Caesar. Napoleon, known for his love of history, meticulously studied Alexander's military campaigns, dreaming of emulating his feats, and according to legend, even slept with the Iliad under his pillow, as Alexander himself supposedly did, seeking to grasp the secrets of his success. Genghis Khan, like Alexander, forged a vast empire, but unlike him, he didn't strive for cultural synthesis. He merely subjugated peoples, showing little regard for their cultures and traditions. Julius Caesar, upon seeing a statue of Alexander, was so struck by his accomplishments that he exclaimed, "By the age of 33, he had conquered the world, and I have done nothing." This moment became a turning point for Caesar, prompting him to reassess his goals and act with renewed vigor. But had Alexander been merely a talented general, his name would long since have faded from human memory. He became a symbol that transcended centuries, the embodiment of strength, courage, and the pursuit of greatness. Roman emperors, striving to emulate his magnificence, copied his mannerisms and attempted to replicate his exploits. Arabs called him Iskandar Dul Karnain, endowing him with mystical attributes and considering him a hero of their legends. In medieval Europe, he became a hero of chivalric romances and legends, celebrating his valor and wisdom. In modern culture, his image is used again and again as the archetype of the conquering genius, willing to go to any lengths, stopping at no obstacle. His name represents not only ambition, power and brilliance, but also the ruthlessness, harshness and loneliness of a ruler who, having reached the pinnacle of success, could not stop, forever striving for new conquests. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Many more fascinating videos await, and we'll continue our exploration. But what was the real Alexander? Not the myth, not the legend, but the man of flesh and blood, with his strengths and weaknesses. How did he rise to power, managing to win the trust and support of his subjects? Why did his army, despite all hardships and privations, follow him to the ends of the earth, believing in his invincibility? And what truly felled the greatest conqueror of antiquity, cutting short his life in the prime of his power? The sources detailing the life of Alexander the Great form a complex mosaic of historical facts, legends, and literary interpretations intertwined. Sadly, no works written by Alexander's contemporaries have survived in their original form. All our knowledge of him is based on later sources created centuries after his death, which undoubtedly colors our perception of his personality and actions. Among the principal authors who wrote about Alexander the Great, Arrian, Plutarch, Quintus Curtius Rufus, and Diodorus Siculus stand out. Their works shape the image of Alexander we know today, and it is to them that we turn in our search for the truth about his life. Arrian, who lived in the 2nd century CE, is considered one of the most reliable and authoritative historians describing Alexander's life. His work, Anabasis Alexandri, is based on the recollections of two contemporaries of the great conqueror, Ptolemy, who was his companion and later became king of Egypt, and Aristobulus, an engineer and participant in the military campaigns. Arrian strived for objectivity and accuracy in his narrative, but his work still bears a tinge of idealization, as he favored the image of Alexander as a wise ruler and brilliant military commander, seeking to emphasize his positive qualities and downplay his flaws. Plutarch, the author of the famous Parallel Lives, wrote about Alexander the Great from a biographical and philosophical perspective. He did not so much analyze military campaigns as attempt to understand Alexander's character, his motivations, ambitions, and personal qualities, seeking to reveal the inner world of the great conqueror. In his descriptions, one can find numerous legends and anecdotes, such as the story of how Alexander, as a child, tamed his horse Bucephalus, demonstrating remarkable ingenuity and skill in handling animals, or how he untied the Gordian knot, showcasing his decisiveness and unwillingness to follow established norms. Plutarch frequently used striking stories and vivid details to emphasize the hero's personality and make his image more memorable. But his work cannot be considered purely historical, as he paid more attention to the moral and ethical aspects of Alexander's life than to the accurate transmission of facts. Quintus Curtius Rufus, a Roman historian of the 1st century CE, wrote, Historiae Alexandri Magni, which, despite the vividness and dramatic nature of its narrative, is considered one of the least reliable sources. His work abounds in fiction, conjecture, and rhetorical devices characteristic of Roman historiography, making it more of a literary work than a historical study. He portrays Alexander not only as a great conqueror, but also as a man prone to tyranny and cruelty, especially in his later years, offering a glimpse into the darker side of his personality. Are you ready to learn more about the sources surrounding Alexander's life? Diodorus Siculus, a historian who lived in the 1st century BCE, included a narrative of Alexander the Great's life in his Bibliotheca Historica, a monumental work encompassing a vast period of world history from mythical times to his own era. His description of Alexander's life and deeds is based on earlier sources, which unfortunately have not survived in their original form, making it difficult to assess their reliability. However, it should be noted that Diodorus himself did not always exhibit sufficient critical judgment when working with the material, often simply retelling established legends and traditions without subjecting them to thorough analysis. It should be noted that, for a number of reasons, ancient authors tended to mythologize the biography of Alexander the Great, attributing to him characteristics not always consistent with historical reality. Firstly, even during his lifetime, he was surrounded by an aura of legends and myths that were actively used for political and ideological purposes, strengthening his power and influence. Alexander himself actively cultivated a cult of personality, spreading rumors of his divine origin and claiming to be the son of Zeus, the supreme god of the Greek pantheon. His military campaigns were viewed not merely as conquests of new territories, but as a sacred mission bestowed upon him by the gods themselves, lending his actions exceptional significance and justifying them in the eyes of the public. Secondly, writers of later eras who produced works about Alexander viewed him through the lens of their own political and cultural values, interpreting his life and deeds according to their beliefs and worldview. Romans, admiring his military genius, saw him as the ideal commander, a role model. Greeks, proud of their cultural heritage, saw him as an heir to the greatness of Hellas, a continuer of their glorious traditions. While Eastern authors, accustomed to despotic forms of government, saw him as a great king, similar to the Persian Shahs, the ruler of a vast empire. The question naturally arises, how reliable are these descriptions that have survived to this day? Each of the ancient authors used specific sources, often unavailable to us, but frequently reworked them in accordance with their own views and preferences, inevitably distorting the real picture of events. We can consider certain facts, such as the main dates of Alexander's life, the routes of his military campaigns, and the results of key battles, to be fairly reliable, as they are confirmed by various independent sources, which attests to their veracity. However, Alexander's personality, his inner world, the motivations for his actions, and even the details of his death remain subjects of debate and discussion among historians, preventing the reaching of definitive conclusions. Modern historians, drawing upon scientific advances and new research methods, are forced to reconstruct the truth about Alexander the Great, carefully comparing different versions of events, analyzing the influence of propaganda, and separating the wheat of truth from the chaff of fiction. Thus, the image of Alexander the Great that has reached us through the ages represents a complex combination of reality and myth, in which historical truth is interwoven with idealization, fictional embellishment, and political interpretations, creating a unique and contradictory portrait of the great conqueror. The legend surrounding Alexander the Great's birth represents one of the earliest and most significant attempts to transform his life into myth, crafting an image of a hero endowed with supernatural abilities and divine lineage. From childhood, he was enveloped in tales of his godly origins. These narratives weren't simply flattering, stroking the young prince's ego. They served as a crucial tool for legitimizing his rule, solidifying his position in the eyes of his subjects. Was he truly Zeus's son, as some claimed, or was this a meticulously crafted political strategy designed to elevate his persona and strengthen his authority? A cornerstone of the myth surrounding Alexander's birth was his mother Olympias's renowned visit to the Delphic oracle, a prophetess wielding immense influence in ancient Greece. Tradition holds that, even before Alexander's birth, the oracle prophesied to Olympias that her son would be like a mighty lion, invincible and godlike, destined for greatness. Furthermore, many versions of this story claim that Philip II, his father, also received a prophecy, though far more unsettling and enigmatic. He dreamt of Olympias, entwined with a colossal serpent, its body radiating a blinding flash of lightning, a vision that filled him with terror. Skilled dream interpreters interpreted this as a sign that the child she carried possessed divine origins and an extraordinary destiny. Olympias herself later actively promoted this interpretation, subtly suggesting that her son was fathered not by a mere mortal, but by Zeus himself, the supreme god of Olympus. Serpents and lightning were traditional symbols of Zeus, associated with his power and authority. His liaisons with earthly women, queens and heroines, were a common motif in Greek mythology, lending the story a particular plausibility. The legend of the king of the gods, taking Olympias as his mortal lover, placed Alexander in the company of legendary heroes like Heracles and Perseus, also considered sons of Zeus, significantly enhancing his status in the eyes of others. It's crucial to understand that such stories didn't simply satisfy the young king's pride. They also bolstered his position among the Macedonian aristocracy and the Greeks, many of whom despised Macedonians as barbarians, viewing them as culturally alien. If Alexander was the son of Zeus, he was not merely human, but a divinely appointed ruler, deserving of obedience and respect, making his figure far more authoritative in their eyes. The political significance of this myth was particularly evident in Egypt, where Alexander was officially recognized as the son of Ammon, the Egyptian god identified by the Greeks with Zeus, drawing parallels between their pantheons. The priests of Ammon's temple in the Siwa oasis greeted him as a demigod, showering him with honors befitting a deity. In turn, he began to call himself the son of Zeus Ammon, emphasizing his connection to the Egyptian gods. This wasn't a simple gesture of politeness or a diplomatic maneuver. He was aligning himself with the traditions of great Eastern monarchs who ruled not by right of conquest, but as children of the gods, chosen to govern their peoples. Skeptics might argue that these legends are merely a beautiful political fairy tale, skillfully crafted to consolidate power and maintain the loyalty of subjects. However, it's vital to understand that in the ancient world, a ruler's divine ancestry wasn't just myth. It was a cornerstone of their legitimacy, an integral part of their image. The belief that Alexander was more than mortal allowed him not only to unite the Macedonians, but also to conquer entire civilizations, causing them to see him not as an enemy, but as a rightful ruler, sent by the gods to establish a new order. So, who was he truly? The son of the thunder god, imbued with divine power, or simply a shrewd politician skillfully using myth to cultivate a demigod image? The answer depends on how much we are willing to believe in the power of legends that continue to inspire great achievements today. Thus, was Alexander the Great the son of Zeus, possessing divine strength, or a man who transformed myth into an effective instrument of power, subjugating entire nations? Regardless, the legends of his divine origins undoubtedly helped solidify his status and gain the trust of his subjects, but they alone did not make him great. The real foundation of his future conquests wasn't the power of the gods, but the strength of the state built by his father, which he skillfully utilized to achieve his ambitions. Are you ready to delve into the history of the creation of a great empire? While Alexander entered the annals of history as a great conqueror who subdued half the world, his father, Philip II, deserves equal recognition as a remarkable builder who laid the solid foundation for his son's future conquests. He bequeathed Alexander not merely a throne, but a transformed Macedonia. He had changed it from an insignificant Balkan kingdom, lost in the backwaters of civilization, into a powerful military superpower capable of dictating its will to other nations. By the time of Philip's tragic death, he controlled virtually all of Greece, a land proud of its culture and history. His army, forged in the crucible of countless battles, was considered the most disciplined and battle-ready in the world, prepared for any challenge. He himself was already developing plans to invade Persia, a mighty empire stretching across vast territories, dreaming of glory and wealth. It was this well-oiled military machine and flourishing empire that Alexander inherited, receiving all the necessary tools for future conquests. But a natural question arises. Were Alexander's astounding victories solely his personal achievement? Or did he merely skillfully capitalize on his father's labors, successfully realizing his ambitious plans? What role did Philip play in shaping his son into a great military commander and politician? And why was their relationship so complex and contradictory, filled with both love and hate? When Philip II ascended the Macedonian throne at the age of 24, the kingdom was in a perilous and unstable state. Its lands suffered devastating raids and plundering from the warlike Illyrians and Thracians, as well as Athenian mercenaries who scorned no spoils. The economy was in decline, and fierce struggles for power and influence raged among the noble families, threatening to erupt into civil war. Philip not only managed to maintain his grip on the throne, demonstrating firmness and decisiveness, but also initiated a systematic strengthening of the state, aimed at economic recovery and military might. He first implemented a sweeping army reform, transforming it into a powerful and disciplined force destined to conquer nearly the known world, extending its dominion across vast territories. It was Philip who created the famed Macedonian phalanx, a tactical formation of tightly packed infantry armed with long spears, which rendered his army virtually invincible on the battlefield. He lengthened his soldiers' spears, transforming them into deadly sarissas, reaching 15.5 feet in length, allowing them to strike the enemy from a considerable distance, preventing close approach. He enhanced the army's mobility, making it more maneuverable and capable of swiftly responding to battlefield changes. He also introduced mandatory continuous military training, turning his soldiers into professional warriors. Unlike the Greek city-states, which assembled armies only for the duration of military campaigns, Macedonia now possessed a standing professional army, loyal to its king and ready to march at a moment's notice. However, the phalanx alone was insufficient to establish dominance over Greece, torn by internal conflicts. Philip understood that infantry alone wouldn't win battles. Cavalry was crucial for delivering swift and unexpected blows. He reformed the elite unit of heavily armed cavalry, the hetairoi, who attacked in a wedge formation, breaking enemy lines and sowing panic. This cavalry, composed of members of the Macedonian nobility, became the army's main striking force, capable of deciding the outcome of battles. The hetairoi would play a pivotal role in Alexander's battles, providing him with a decisive advantage over his adversaries. But military reform was only a small part of Philip's rich legacy. He wasn't merely a militaristic adventurer dreaming of glory and riches. He was a far-sighted strategist, a talented politician, and a wise reformer capable of thinking on a grand scale and anticipating the consequences of his actions. Instead of simply conquering cities and subjugating them by force, he skillfully manipulated them, forging dynastic marriages, creating networks of alliances and intrigue, achieving his goals through diplomacy. Philip understood that Greece had been fractured into numerous warring city-states for centuries, and that they could be subdued individually with minimal losses by cleverly exploiting their internal contradictions. He didn't storm Athens, a powerful and influential city, but instead weakened its influence by subduing its allies, depriving it of support and resources. He didn't destroy Thebes, a mighty city that rivaled Athens for hegemony in Greece, but instead presented them with the reality of his military might, forcing them to acknowledge his supremacy. A pivotal moment in his political career was the Battle of Chaeronea, where the Macedonian army decisively defeated the combined forces of the Greek city-states. Following this victory, Philip established the League of Corinth, nominally uniting the Greek cities under his rule and securing his control over all of Greece. Despite many city-states resenting Macedonian dominance and yearning for independence, Philip secured recognition of his leadership without dismantling the city-state system. Instead, he skillfully used it to his advantage. However, despite his achievements, Philip II wasn't a flawless ruler, devoid of weaknesses and flaws. Like many powerful and autocratic kings, he made too many enemies, both within and outside Macedonia, which ultimately led to his demise. He made no secret of his numerous love affairs and illegitimate children, leading to serious conflict within his family that threatened to escalate into civil war. The most significant discord arose when Philip married the young Macedonian woman Cleopatra Eurydice, an aristocrat from the prominent Attalus family. This angered his first wife, Olympias, and their son Alexander. This marriage shifted the balance of power at court, as Philip could now have legitimate children with stronger claims to the Macedonian throne than Alexander, whose mother Olympias was an Epirote princess, not a Macedonian. At Cleopatra's wedding feast, her uncle Attalus, heavily intoxicated, declared that Macedonia would finally have a legitimate heir worthy of continuing Philip's legacy. Alexander took this as a direct insult. Enraged, he hurled a wine cup at Attalus, expressing his contempt. Philip, also drunk, tried to attack his son, but stumbled and fell, revealing his weakness. Alexander, looking down at him with disdain, remarked, "This man wants to cross from Europe to Asia, yet he cannot cross a banquet table," subtly highlighting Philip's inability to govern effectively. Following this conflict, Alexander and his mother were forced to flee Macedonia, fearing Philip's wrath and his new wife's vengeance. However, Philip eventually recalled his son, recognizing Alexander as his most capable heir, despite their difficult relationship. This reconciliation was short-lived. Months later, at the wedding of Philip's daughter, the king was assassinated by his bodyguard Pausanias, who suddenly attacked him with a dagger. The assassin was immediately killed, but the question of who orchestrated the assassination and their motives remains a subject of historical debate. One theory suggests it was an act of personal revenge by Pausanias due to an insult from Attalus that Philip failed to address. Political theories, however, propose the involvement of Olympias, who hated Philip for his infidelities and new marriages, or even Alexander himself, fearing a new heir and eager to seize the throne. Regardless, Philip's death was a turning point for Alexander. He swiftly seized power, ruthlessly suppressing all potential rivals, including Philip and Cleopatra's young son, Eurydice, and secured his position as sole ruler of Macedonia. Yet, Philip's legacy lived on in him, shaping his decisions and actions. Every battle, every political maneuver, every strategic move bore the imprint of the man who had transformed Macedonia into a mighty empire before him, laying the groundwork for Alexander's future conquests. Now, inheriting his father's throne and army, what awaited Alexander? Unlike his father, Philip II, a pragmatic realist, Alexander lacked caution and calculation. He was a dreamer and conqueror, driven not just by power and wealth, but by an insatiable thirst for glory, recognition, and immortality. This fundamental difference in character and ambition shaped the course of history, making Alexander the Great one of history's most remarkable rulers. Alexander the Great's image is often intertwined not only with his incredible military prowess and strategic genius, but also with an intellectual legacy forged under the tutelage of Aristotle, antiquity's greatest philosopher. This has spawned numerous legends and myths about the depth of Alexander's immersion in philosophy, science, and the arts, and his appreciation for knowledge and pursuit of understanding. But how accurate is this established image? Was he truly a diligent student, absorbing Aristotle's ideas and teachings? Or was this period of his life a minor episode with limited influence on his worldview and principles? When Alexander turned 13, Philip II, recognizing the importance of education for a future ruler, decided his son needed a wise mentor, someone who could not only teach him the fundamentals of literacy, rhetoric, and logic, but also prepare him for the weighty role of a ruler capable of governing wisely and leading his people to prosperity. The choice fell on Aristotle, already a renowned thinker whose work had profoundly impacted the development of philosophy and science. For Alexander's education, Philip set aside a picturesque location, the Temple of the Nymphs at Mieza, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. There, Alexander and several sons of Macedonian nobles spent 3 years studying under the renowned philosopher, acquiring wisdom and knowledge. Tradition holds that it was there Alexander first developed an interest in medicine, zoology, rhetoric, and of course philosophy, captivated by Aristotle's ideas and seeking to understand the mysteries of the universe. However, unlike Plato, whose ideal ruler was a philosopher immersed in contemplation and the pursuit of truth, Aristotle believed a king was first and foremost a man of action, possessing strong will and the ability to make swift, effective decisions. This aligned with the spirit of the Macedonian elite, who valued military and administrative skills above abstract thought and philosophical discourse. One of the most widespread myths surrounding Alexander is that he never parted with Homer's Iliad, keeping it under his pillow and rereading it before each battle, inspired by the feats of ancient heroes. In reality, we lack direct evidence for this. It's likely a legend. However, it is known that Aristotle prepared a special copy of the Iliad for Alexander, annotated with his own markings, highlighting passages deemed most important, offering valuable lessons and examples for emulation. Alexander may indeed have used the epic narrative of the Trojan War as a source of inspiration and motivation, viewing himself as a new Achilles, striving for glory and immortality, but the depth of his engagement with the text's philosophical and moral dimensions remains a matter of debate. For him, the Iliad was probably less a literary work and more a model of behavior for an ideal hero, one who relentlessly pursues glory and recognition, regardless of danger or hardship. Despite Aristotle's significant influence on Alexander's development, their views and beliefs eventually diverged, leading to a certain estrangement between teacher and student. A key point of disagreement concerned Aristotle's view of barbarians, all non-Greek peoples. Aristotle, steeped in Greek elitism, believed Greeks were inherently superior in intellect and nature, and that a Macedonian king should rule barbarians as a protector and civilizer, preventing cultural mixing. Alexander, however, confronted with the vast territories and diverse populations of his empire, adopted a policy of integration rather than domination, seeking to unite different cultures and peoples. He adopted the customs of conquered peoples, incorporated Persians into his army to fight alongside Macedonians, married Eastern women, and even adopted Persian attire, demonstrating respect for Eastern culture and traditions. This shocked and angered many of his companions, raised on the idea of Greek superiority, and likely drew criticism from Aristotle, who believed a ruler should not assimilate with subjects and lose their national identity. Another significant point of contention was their differing views on power. Aristotle, following Plato, believed a ruler should be bound by laws and the counsel of wise advisors, that monarchy should serve the good of the state and its people. Alexander, particularly after conquering Persia, increasingly viewed his power as absolute and unlimited, considering himself a divine viceroy on earth. He demanded worship, introducing proskynesis, a ritual previously reserved for Persian kings, believing the king was not merely first among equals, but a near-divine being worthy of deification. This provoked resistance among Macedonians, raised on freedom and equality, who refused proskynesis, deeming it unacceptable for free Greeks. Alexander ultimately rejected his teacher's philosophy, replacing it with an Eastern concept of sacred kingship, where the ruler possesses divine authority above laws and customs. Nevertheless, Aristotle's influence on Alexander cannot be understated. He instilled in him a foundation of knowledge and a thirst for understanding. Even if Alexander didn't follow his teachings literally, he inherited an interest in culture and a desire not just to conquer new territories, but also to transform the world, spreading Greek culture and knowledge among conquered peoples. Perhaps it was this philosophical education that allowed him not only to dismantle empires, but also to build new ones, paving the way for a cultural synthesis between East and West, profoundly influencing the subsequent development of civilization. But if Aristotle prepared Alexander for kingship, he could hardly have foreseen the dramatic circumstances of his ascension and the trials that awaited him. Everything changed on that tragic day when Philip II was murdered, and Alexander, barely processing the event, found himself in the midst of a fierce power struggle, forced to demonstrate his decisiveness and willpower. The death of Philip II remains one of the most enigmatic and significant events in ancient history, marking the dawn of a new era. This moment not only ended the reign of a great king, but also paved Alexander's path to power, shaping his future. Yet, the mystery remains. Was the assassination a random act, a crime of personal vengeance, or the result of a carefully plotted conspiracy? Who benefited most from Philip's death, and could Alexander be implicated in this heinous crime? Are you ready to unravel the mystery of Philip's assassination and uncover the identity of his killer? In July of 336 BC, Philip II arrived in Aegae, the ancient capital of Macedonia, to celebrate the lavish wedding of his beloved daughter Cleopatra to Alexander I, the king of Epirus. This was not merely a joyous family occasion, but a significant political act designed to strengthen the alliance between Macedonia and Epirus, two powerful kingdoms on the Balkan Peninsula. Philip was at the height of his power and influence, having conquered all of Greece and unified it within the Corinthian League. He was poised to launch a grand campaign against Persia, a conquest that would be the culmination of his career, the triumph of a lifetime. He dreamt of conquering the vast and wealthy Persian Empire, stretching from Egypt to India, but fate had other plans. He would not live to see this triumphant day, nor enjoy the fruits of his labors. As he majestically entered the theater, surrounded by his retinue and numerous guests, his bodyguard, Pausanias, suddenly lunged forward and plunged a dagger into the king's heart. Philip fell dead, struck by a treacherous blow, while the assassin attempted to melt into the crowd, only to be immediately slain by the guards before he could offer any explanation for his actions. For a long time, the official version of the assassination remained one of personal vengeance, fueled by an insult and humiliation inflicted upon Pausanias at court. According to ancient authors, Pausanias was of noble birth, yet he was subjected to mockery and humiliation at court, deeply wounding his honor and dignity. Attalus, the uncle of Cleopatra Eurydice, Philip's new wife, and a man of considerable influence at court, was to blame. Legend holds that Pausanias had once been a favorite of Philip, enjoying his favor and trust. But after the rise of a new favorite, his position at court weakened, leaving him feeling forgotten and useless. To restore his honor and reclaim his lost standing, he insulted Attalus, implying that he was unworthy of commanding troops and lacked the necessary qualities. In response, Attalus and his men subjected Pausanias to cruel humiliation, subjecting him to ridicule and mockery, while Philip refused to intervene, unwilling to involve himself in the conflict. From that moment, Pausanias nurtured a plan of revenge, harboring a thirst for retribution, which he fulfilled on the day of the wedding, seizing a convenient opportunity. However, many modern historians doubt that Philip's assassination was merely an act of personal vengeance stemming from a personal grievance. Too much happened too conveniently, too smoothly. The assassin made no attempt to escape, and his immediate death meant he left behind no explanation, no revelation of his motives. This suggests a carefully orchestrated conspiracy involving influential figures. And if this is indeed the case, who could have been behind this monstrous crime, and what were their goals? The prime suspect, traditionally, is Olympias, Alexander's mother, a woman known for her forceful personality and implacable nature. Her hatred of Philip, fueled by his infidelities and subsequent marriages, was well known both within and beyond the court. After the king's marriage to Cleopatra Eurydice, her own position at court became precarious, and her son Alexander risked being excluded from the line of succession, making her situation incredibly vulnerable. To make matters worse, Olympias was not just queen, but also a priestess of the cult of Dionysus, wielding considerable influence at court and commanding numerous loyal followers. Ancient accounts claim that after Philip's death, she brutally executed his young wife and newborn son, eliminating the last potential claimant to the Macedonian throne. This suggests that she might have been interested in eliminating Philip even before his death, seeking to secure her son's unhindered access to power. But if Olympias was indeed behind her husband's murder, did Alexander know about it? And was he complicit in the conspiracy? Historians are divided on this issue, with no consensus. On the one hand, Alexander acted swiftly and decisively after his father's assassination, leaving no room for doubt or deliberation. He immediately rallied his supporters, secured the army's allegiance, and eliminated all potential rivals to the throne, demonstrating his readiness to fight for power. Furthermore, Attalus and all his supporters were soon killed, suggesting Alexander was determined to remove anyone who might threaten his rule. Even if Alexander didn't know of the conspiracy beforehand, he certainly didn't intend to punish those responsible after Philip's death, aiming to maximize his advantage from the situation. On the other hand, it's difficult to imagine a young prince in a precarious position at court and beholden to his father's will, orchestrating his father's assassination, especially in such an overt and audacious manner, risking his own life and future. Besides Olympias and Alexander, the Persians, who had a vested interest in weakening Macedonia, were also named among the potential instigators of Philip's murder. Philip was preparing for war with the Persian Empire, posing a serious threat, and his assassination would have benefited the Persian king Darius III, who sought to prevent the Macedonian army's invasion of his territory. This theory is supported by the fact that Pausanias, according to some sources, may have been connected to Persian agents, receiving money and instructions from them. However, there is no direct and irrefutable evidence for this theory, and it remains mere speculation. Regardless, Philip's death altered the course of history and had a profound impact on subsequent events. In an instant, the grand plan to conquer Persia passed into the hands of the young and ambitious Alexander, who succeeded in realizing it, surpassing his father. Whether he was complicit in his father's murder or simply took advantage of the situation to seize power remains an enigma we may never solve. But one thing is clear: without this tragedy, his path to power might have been vastly different, and the world could have looked entirely unlike what it became. Philip II's death catapulted Alexander to the Macedonian throne, but his power in the early months of his reign remained precarious and unstable. Dissidents within Macedonia still challenged his authority and aspired to power, while the Greek city-states, only recently subdued by Philip, saw his death as a chance to regain their lost independence and throw off Macedonian rule. While Alexander consolidated his power in Macedonia, rebellions and uprisings erupted across Greece, threatening to escalate into full-scale war. The young king needed to act swiftly and decisively to quell these revolts and restore order. Otherwise, his ambitions might crumble before they could fully unfold, and he could lose his throne. These crucial months would determine whether Alexander would remain ruler of only a small Macedonia or extend his dominion over all of Greece, opening up new horizons and opportunities. Following Philip's assassination, Athens was the first to attempt to exploit the situation and reclaim its lost freedom. Influential Athenian orators, primarily Demosthenes, delivered fiery speeches, declaring that Macedonia no longer posed a threat and that the time had come to restore democracy and regain independence. Athens hastily began assembling an army, forging alliances with other city-states, and seeking support from other polis, aiming to create an anti-Macedonian coalition. Thebes joined them, harboring a long-standing hatred of Macedonian rule and prepared to fight for its independence to the death. The Thebans launched a rebellion, besieging the Macedonian garrison in the Cadmea fortress and calling for a pan-Hellenic uprising, hoping other cities would follow their example. But it was at this critical juncture that Alexander demonstrated how he differed from other young rulers lacking experience in governance. What would the young Alexander do to maintain his power and suppress the rebellion of the Greek city-states? Having barely secured power and consolidated his position on the Macedonian throne, Alexander, displaying incredible energy and decisiveness, immediately marched south, assembling a formidable army and within weeks triumphantly arriving in Greece. The Thebans, unprepared for such a rapid response and the swift arrival of the Macedonian forces, found themselves trapped, having had no time to prepare their defenses. Alexander did not engage in lengthy and tedious negotiations, attempting to persuade the Thebans to submit to his rule, but immediately surrounded the city, demonstrating his strength and resolve. He offered the Thebans surrender and acknowledgement of his authority, promising to spare their lives and property, but received a sharp and haughty refusal. Furthermore, in their propaganda, the Thebans referred to Alexander not as the Macedonian king, but as a barbarian, alluding to his semi-mythical origins from barbarian peoples, further inflaming his anger and strengthening his resolve to punish them for their defiance. He then made a decision that would become the most terrible and brutal punishment for the city that dared to challenge him and rebel against his authority. Thebes fell after a fierce and bloody battle in which both sides displayed incredible bravery and resilience. Following the city's capture, Alexander ordered its complete destruction, leaving not one stone upon another. Homes and public buildings were razed, the inhabitants killed or sold into slavery, and the city itself erased from the map, reduced to ruins. Of all the structures, only the temples dedicated to the gods and the house of the poet Pindar, whom Alexander respected and revered for his talent and wisdom, were spared. The remnants of the city were left as a grim warning to all of Greece. Any rebellion against Macedonia and its ruler would be brutally suppressed and met with inevitable retribution. News of Thebes' fall and destruction shocked Greece and instilled terror in the Greek city-states. No city dared openly defy Alexander again, fearing a similar fate. But if Thebes was razed to the ground, why did Athens, which also revolted against Macedonian rule, escape a similar fate and avoid such brutal punishment? Athens, witnessing Thebes' tragic demise, swiftly dispatched ambassadors to Alexander, offering apologies and submission to avert retribution. Furthermore, Alexander understood that destroying Athens would be unproductive and damage his reputation. Unlike Thebes, a primarily military power, Athens remained the cultural and intellectual heart of Greece, a flourishing center for art, philosophy, and science. Its destruction would incite the hatred of all of Greece, and Alexander, despite his ruthlessness and decisiveness, already thought strategically and carefully cultivated his image. He found it more advantageous to have Athens subservient but intact, rather than reduced to rubble and create new enemies. As a result, Athens retained its autonomy and avoided destruction, though it was compelled to acknowledge Alexander's authority and submit to his will. All of Greece understood that Philip's son had not merely inherited his father's power, but had confirmed his dominance through force, demonstrating his resolve and mercilessness. The path to the east, to new conquests and achievements, lay open before him, and no one in Greece dared to impede his progress. Greece was pacified, and none dared challenge Alexander. The way to the east, to new lands and riches he had dreamed of since childhood, was now clear. This was the ambition of his father Philip, who had prepared his army for a campaign into Persia. However, it was his son Alexander who would fulfill this grand design. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor, declaring war on the Persian Empire, one of the most powerful states of its time. This moment marked the beginning of his great conquests, which irrevocably altered the world and left an indelible mark on human history. However, Persia remained the mightiest power of its time, possessing immense resources and a vast army. Its territories stretched from Egypt to India. Its population numbered in the millions. Its army was numerous and well-equipped. Its resources seemed inexhaustible, and strategically important cities were protected by formidable fortifications capable of withstanding prolonged sieges. Conquering such an empire required not only military might, but also flawless strategy, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances, and precise calculations that considered all potential risks and challenges. Alexander's first serious test awaited him at the Granicus River, where he was to confront the Persian army. After crossing into Asia, the Macedonians moved east, liberating the Ionian Greek cities from Persian rule and striving to secure the support of the local population. This allowed Alexander to garner local support, establish a secure rear, and cultivate a reputation not as a conqueror, but as a liberator bringing freedom and independence. However, the Persian satraps were unwilling to relinquish the lands of King Darius without a fight, and were determined to repel the Macedonian invasion. They assembled their forces and resolved to engage the Macedonians in a decisive battle on the Asian frontier, choosing a favorable defensive position on the Granicus River, which flowed through mountainous terrain. The Persian army occupied advantageous heights on the opposite bank, giving them an advantage over the advancing Macedonians. Their cavalry was deployed along the river, ready to repel any attempts by the Macedonians to cross to the other side, while the infantry and Greek mercenaries were positioned higher up on the hillsides, prepared to attack if the Macedonians attempted to cross the river and breach their defenses. When Alexander arrived at the Granicus River, his commanders advised him to wait until morning to cross the river under better visibility and more favorable conditions, when the soldiers would be rested and ready for battle. However, Alexander understood that waiting would only allow the enemy to strengthen their defenses and demoralize his own troops, causing them to doubt his resolve and capabilities. He decided to attack immediately, preventing the enemy from preparing and consolidating their position. The Macedonian cavalry, led by Alexander himself, was the first to plunge into the icy river water, attempting to break through to the other bank and engage the Persian horsemen. However, the river's current slowed their advance, and the Persian horsemen, benefiting from their superior position, rained down arrows and spears from above. In the ensuing fierce engagement, the Macedonians lost their footing, their spears became submerged, and the enemy struck from the hillsides, using their advantage. At one point, it seemed that the attack would be repelled and the Macedonian cavalry would be routed. But then Alexander himself led a shock detachment of his elite hypaspists and plunged into the thick of the battle, demonstrating his courage and determination. His cavalry attacked the Persian horsemen on their flank, broke their ranks, and sowed chaos among them. The Persian horsemen faltered under the onslaught of the Macedonian cavalry and began to retreat, unable to withstand the furious attack. The Macedonian phalanx followed, having by then crossed the river and advanced in a dense formation upon the enemy, sweeping everything before it. The Persian infantry was disorganized and unable to offer serious resistance, and the Greek mercenaries, seeing the Persian army's defeat and without orders to support them, fled in disarray, saving their lives. The Battle of the Granicus River became Alexander's first major victory in Asia, but its significance extended far beyond a single battlefield. First, it demonstrated his tactical boldness and willingness to take risks, personally participating in the attack and inspiring his soldiers to heroic deeds. This inspired the soldiers, strengthened their faith in their king, and demoralized the enemy, causing them to doubt their own strength. What strategic decisions will Alexander make after his first victory in Asia? Secondly, by his example, he demonstrated to the Persians that the Macedonian army was not only their equal in strength and valor, but also capable of achieving victory even under the most difficult circumstances, instilling fear and uncertainty in them. But most importantly, Alexander didn't merely win battles and crush enemy forces. He waged a subtle psychological war, skillfully influencing the enemy even before the battle began, using various methods and techniques. He understood that fear often destroys an army faster than spears and swords, and therefore sought to maximize this effect. The Macedonian king meticulously cultivated the image of an invincible warrior, a hero endowed with supernatural abilities who always led from the front, unafraid of wounds or death, and led his army to inevitable victory. This gave rise to incredible legends that quickly spread throughout the East, sowing panic and confusion among the ranks of the Persian army. Before battles, he issued orders that amplified the effect of fear and demoralized the enemy, causing them to doubt their own capabilities. In conquered cities, he did not destroy sanctuaries and respected local customs, demonstrating his respect for local culture and showing that he had come not as a barbarian intent on destruction and plunder, but as a rightful successor to power, ready to rule justly and wisely. However, he made examples of traitors and cities that resisted, demonstrating his cruelty and ruthlessness to make others consider whether resisting his rule was worthwhile. Persian soldiers heard incredible stories of the Macedonian king who personally led attacks, swam across raging rivers under a hail of arrows, and found a way out of any difficult situation. This instilled terror in them and caused some commanders to retreat before battle, anticipating inevitable defeat. Thus, Alexander waged war not only with his sword, but also with the legend of himself, creating an aura of invincibility and striking fear into the hearts of his enemies. The victory at Granicus opened up a wide path into the heart of Asia Minor, presenting new opportunities and prospects. Before him now lay the untold riches of Persia, vast territories and new peoples, but also new dangers and challenges requiring wisdom and decisiveness. Forward, into the heart of Darius's empire, into lands that had never seen such a conqueror striving for world domination. Following the victory at Granicus, the way into the interior of Asia Minor was open, and Alexander continued his rapid eastward march, conquering new cities and territories. Cities previously under Persian rule one by one accepted his authority, rejoicing at their liberation from Persian dominion. And where resistance was encountered, the Macedonian army ruthlessly demonstrated its might, suppressing all attempts at rebellion. But even amidst military triumphs and the conquest of new territories, Alexander did not forget the symbols that could enhance his influence and strengthen the myth of his divine destiny, instilling in the hearts of people a belief in his greatness. One such symbol awaited him in the heart of Anatolia, in the ancient city of Gordium, shrouded in legends and myths. It was here, according to ancient tradition, that the enigmatic Gordian knot resided, an ancient artifact with which the legend of dominion over all of Asia was associated. According to legend, Gordius, a simple farmer, was once proclaimed king of Phrygia after an oracle foretold that the ruler would arrive in a wagon. In gratitude to the gods for the honor bestowed upon him, he dedicated his chariot to the temple of Zeus, tying it to a column with a complex and intricate knot that no one could untie. For centuries the knot remained untouched, and prophecy declared that whoever could untie it would become the master of all Asia, the ruler of the world. When Alexander arrived in Gordium in the spring of 333 BC, he could not ignore this challenge, striving to prove his exceptionalism and right to world domination. The question was whether he truly untied the knot, as the legend prescribed, or resolved its fate in another way, demonstrating his ingenuity and unconventional thinking. Ancient authors differ in their accounts of this event, offering various versions of what happened. According to one version, Alexander examined the complex knot for a long time, trying to find a way to untie it, and then simply removed the securing pin holding the ropes together, thus untying it without the use of force, but still adhering to ancient tradition. This version emphasizes his resourcefulness, his ability to find unconventional solutions, and his respect for ancient traditions and the gods. However, another version, more dramatic and symbolic, became more popular and widespread. Unwilling to spend time on intricate manipulations, Alexander simply drew his sword and severed the knot with one powerful blow, demonstrating his strength and decisiveness. This story immediately became symbolic, demonstrating his resoluteness, unwavering will, and readiness not to follow others' rules, but to establish his own, stopping at nothing on his path to his goal. However the event actually transpired, the myth of the Gordian knot quickly spread throughout the ancient world, solidifying Alexander's reputation as a great conqueror. Alexander consciously used this myth as part of his political strategy, demonstrating to all that he was not merely a skilled military leader, but a man destined by fate, divinely empowered to rule Asia. For his army and allies, it served as further confirmation of his exceptionalism and chosen status. For his enemies, it instilled additional fear and respect. The tale of the Gordian knot established him as a leader who didn't wait, hesitate, or adhere to old rules, but forged his own destiny, stopping at nothing. This symbolism accompanied him throughout his campaign, strengthening his authority and inspiring his army to new feats of daring as he faced true trials ahead. A confrontation with Darius III himself, and the first battle that would decide the fate of the entire Persian Empire. The myth of the severed Gordian knot bolstered the Macedonians' belief in their king's special destiny, his predestination for greatness. But ahead lay challenges where not fate, but the sharpness of the sword and the strength of the army demanded maximum concentration and exertion of all forces. Deep within Asia, Alexander knew he would eventually face the King of Kings, Darius III, to decide the war's outcome. The Persian ruler couldn't ignore the Macedonians' rapid advance into his empire and assembled a massive army to personally halt the invasion and defend his lands. In the autumn of 333 BC, the two greatest armies of the ancient world clashed at Issus, a day that became a moment of truth for both empires, determining their future. Darius commanded an incomparably larger force, numerically surpassing the Macedonian army many times over, but his army suffered significant weaknesses that could negate his superior numbers. The Persian military system was complex and heterogeneous, comprised of soldiers recruited from various provinces. These soldiers spoke different languages, employed diverse tactics, and didn't always share Darius's motivation to fight, often pursuing their own interests. What tactical errors would Darius make in the upcoming battle against Alexander's army? Unlike the Macedonians, for whom victory meant further glory and wealth, the chance to conquer new lands and immortalize their names, many in the Persian army fought only under duress, lacking enthusiasm and risking their lives out of fear of punishment. Alexander, on the other hand, commanded an elite, superbly trained army where every soldier knew his place and believed in his leader, ready to give his life for him. Furthermore, Darius made a serious strategic error by choosing an unsuitable battlefield, a decision that played into the Macedonians' hands. The Persians intended to leverage their numerical superiority, but the narrow plain near Issus negated this advantage, preventing them from deploying their forces effectively. The Macedonians were able to maintain a strong defensive position, preventing encirclement and utilizing their tactical flexibility. The discipline and organization of the Macedonian phalanx gave Alexander a decisive advantage in close combat. When the battle commenced, Alexander personally led the cavalry charge on the right flank, shattering the elite Persian units composed of experienced and well-equipped warriors. Meanwhile, his infantry withstood the onslaught of the main body of Persian soldiers, putting up fierce resistance. Seeing his best troops falter under the Macedonian advance, Darius made a fatal error, succumbing to cowardice and panic. He decided the battle was lost and fled first, abandoning his army to its fate. Surrounded by his bodyguards, the king of Persia hastily left the field, leaving his army leaderless and devoid of confidence in victory. This triggered panic in the Persian ranks, and soon the retreat became a general rout, devolving into a chaotic withdrawal. The Macedonians achieved a decisive victory, routing the Persian army and seizing abundant spoils. However, Alexander didn't immediately pursue Darius, although he could have attempted to capture him that very day, exploiting the panic and confusion in the Persian ranks. Instead, he focused on capturing the Persian camp, which housed the immense wealth accumulated by Persian kings over many years, as well as Darius's family, his mother, wife, and children. This move held significant strategic importance, allowing Alexander to control the situation and utilize the prisoners to his advantage. Now, Alexander could use Darius's relatives as a political pawn, emphasizing that the Persian king not only lost the battle, but failed to protect even his own family, leaving them at the mercy of the victor. The Battle of Issus became not just a military triumph, but a symbol of Alexander's superiority over Darius, a demonstration of his military genius and power. The Macedonian king proved himself not a fortunate conqueror, but a military commander unparalleled in history, capable of crushing any foe. His armies now believed him truly invincible, guided by fate itself. But while Darius remained alive and at large, the war was far from over. New trials and battles awaited Alexander, including one of the greatest engagements of his life, a battle that would decide the fate of the entire Persian Empire. After the victory at Issus, it became clear that the war with Persia was not yet concluded, and Darius had no intention of surrendering. But instead of immediately pursuing Darius deeper into Asia, Alexander made an unexpected and risky decision to turn south towards Egypt, leaving the Persian king in his rear. This move was not only a military necessity dictated by a desire to secure his flanks, but also part of his grand political design to establish control over the entire region. Liberating Egypt from Persian rule would solidify his reputation not as a plundering conqueror, but as a rightful ruler of ancient lands, bringing peace and prosperity. The Egyptians, weary of Persian dominion, welcomed Alexander as a savior who freed them from foreign oppression. For 200 years, the land of the pyramids had been under Persian rule. While Egyptian priests and the aristocracy formally retained some influence, their independence was merely an illusion, their power severely curtailed. Persian kings treated Egypt as a distant and insignificant province, and the priests of the local temples viewed them as foreigners who disrespected their traditions and gods. Alexander, in contrast, behaved differently, demonstrating wisdom and respect for the local culture. From his first days in Egypt, he showed deference to local beliefs, making sacrifices in the temples, honoring the Egyptian gods, and reaffirming the privileges of the priesthood, acknowledging their authority. For the Egyptians, this was a clear sign that he was not a conqueror bent on pillage and destruction, but a liberator, sent by the gods to restore justice. Yet the most enigmatic and mysterious event of Alexander's Egyptian campaign was his encounter with the oracle of Ammon in the remote oasis of Siwa, lost in the boundless expanse of the desert. This temple was considered one of the holiest sites in the ancient world, and the oracle itself one of the most authoritative and prescient. The Greeks equated Ammon with Zeus, so Alexander journeyed there not merely as the new ruler of Egypt, seeking to consolidate his power, but as a man striving to confirm his divine selection and right to world domination. The long and arduous journey across the scorching desert, fraught with dangers and hardships, the trials of heat and water scarcity, all amplified the mystery of his mission and underscored its importance. Upon reaching Ammon's temple, the priests greeted him with the highest honors, showering him with respect and acknowledgement, and admitted him to the oracle so he could ask his questions and receive answers. What exactly the oracle told Alexander remains a secret shrouded in the mists of time, with many varying accounts of the event. One version claims he inquired about his destiny and received confirmation that he was the true son of Zeus Ammon, born for great deeds, destined to rule the world. Another suggests the priest simply addressed him as the son of a god, a traditional appellation for pharaohs, but Alexander took it literally, becoming convinced of his divine origin. Whatever the case, after his visit to Siwa, he no longer doubted his divine mandate, and his self-assurance multiplied tenfold. He was no longer simply the Macedonian king, but a man granted by the gods the right to world dominion, chosen for greatness. This episode profoundly impacted his perception of power and perhaps his very personality, altering his character and worldview. Returning to Egypt after his visit to the Siwa oasis, he founded Alexandria, a city destined to become a symbol of the new Hellenistic world, blending Eastern and Western cultures. But soon he would have to leave Egypt and journey eastward again, for the main confrontation with Darius awaited, a battle that would decide the fate of the entire Persian Empire. After his Egyptian triumph and the acknowledgement of his divine origin, Alexander was no longer simply a Macedonian king striving for imperial expansion. He now saw himself as the rightful ruler of ancient lands, a successor to the glorious traditions of great empires, and a man destined to unite the world under his rule. However, his main objective, the final defeat of Persia and the capture of Darius, remained unachieved, and new trials lay before him. Darius III, despite his crushing defeat at Issus and the loss of Egypt, had managed to assemble a new army, recruiting soldiers from the far reaches of his vast empire, and prepared to deliver a final decisive blow to Alexander, hoping to reclaim what was lost and restore his former glory. What strategy would Alexander employ for the decisive battle against Darius? In the autumn of 331 BCE, two armies, two of the greatest forces of their time, clashed in the momentous Battle of Gaugamela, a conflict that would determine the fate of the East and shape the course of history. Darius's assembled Persian army significantly outnumbered Alexander's Macedonian forces, creating an illusion of invincibility. Historians estimate Darius mustered anywhere from 200,000 to 500,000 soldiers, including cavalry, war elephants, and elite mercenaries drawn from across his vast empire. Furthermore, learning from past mistakes, Darius chose an open, flat plain for the battle, allowing his superior cavalry to fully deploy and potentially encircle Alexander's army, exploiting the numerical advantage. It seemed Darius had learned from his defeat at Issus, meticulously preparing and anticipating Macedonian tactics, devising countermeasures. However, Alexander, demonstrating his military genius, successfully imposed his own strategy. The discipline and training of his troops made the outcome almost predictable, despite the Persian numerical superiority. The battle began with the Persian cavalry, following Darius's orders, attempting to outflank the Macedonians, aiming to encircle them and restrict their maneuverability. Darius hoped to overwhelm Alexander's army through encirclement and sheer numbers, leveraging his vast cavalry force. But the Macedonians, anticipating this maneuver, employed a feigned retreat, skillfully drawing a portion of the Persian cavalry away and weakening the center of their formation, creating a breach in their defenses. At this critical moment, Alexander launched his decisive strike, turning the tide of battle. Leading his companion cavalry, he smashed through the Persian center, aiming directly for Darius himself, seeking to capture him. This audacious maneuver sowed chaos and panic among the Persians, demoralizing their troops. Seeing their king potentially captured, the soldiers panicked, their morale crumbling. Darius, mirroring his actions at Issus, fled the battlefield, prioritizing his own survival and abandoning his soldiers leaderless and hopeless. Deprived of their leader, the Persian army quickly dissolved into a disorganized rout, pursued by Macedonian cavalry. Yet Darius's fate was sealed, and his flight would not save him from death. After the battle, he fled deeper into his domains, hoping to raise a new army and continue resistance. But his own associates, realizing Alexander would inevitably overtake and capture them, betrayed their king, choosing to align with the conqueror. Darius was murdered by conspirators led by Bessus, a satrap who aspired to declare himself the new ruler of Persia and negotiate peace with Alexander. This treacherous act, however, failed to save the empire from conquest. Upon learning of Darius's death, Alexander declared himself the rightful heir and continued his conquest of the eastern lands, asserting his claim to the Persian throne. Victory at Gaugamela transformed Alexander from a mere victor in war into the master of Asia, the ruler of a vast empire stretching from the Mediterranean Sea to India. The gates of Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis swung open, revealing untold riches and unprecedented opportunities. Nothing could halt his triumphant march. New horizons beckoned from the boundless deserts of Central Asia to the majestic mountains of India. After Gaugamela and Darius's death, Alexander stood as the undisputed ruler of the Persian Empire, his authority absolute and unquestioned. However, the farther east he advanced, conquering new lands and subjugating new peoples, the more profoundly his methods of governance and his relationships with his longtime companions shifted. The Macedonian army, composed of soldiers who once loyally served his father Philip, increasingly voiced their discontent with his policies and decisions, witnessing his departure from traditional Macedonian ways. Alexander adopted Eastern customs, demanded worship, surrounded himself with Persian advisors, and his ambitions far surpassed the scope of typical Macedonian conquests, aiming for global dominance. This fostered growing tension within the army, leading to dissent and conspiracies, causing Alexander to perceive betrayal and plots even where they might not have existed. One of the most notorious and tragic episodes of this era was the execution of Philotas and the murder of his father, Parmenion, men long considered among Alexander's most loyal and devoted companions, instrumental to his victories. Philotas, son of the renowned Macedonian general Parmenion, commanded the elite companion cavalry, the backbone of the Macedonian army, and held a place within Alexander's inner circle, enjoying his trust. However, over time, disagreements arose between them, fueled by differing visions for the empire's future and contrasting methods of governance. Philotas, like many veteran Macedonian officers, disapproved of the adoption of Eastern customs at court, viewing it as a betrayal of Macedonian traditions, and criticized Alexander's preference for Persian nobles over Macedonians. His outspokenness and confidence made him a problematic figure for Alexander, and his influence within the army aroused suspicion and fear. In 328 BCE, a plot against the king was uncovered at Alexander's headquarters, exacerbating his paranoia and distrust. A Macedonian officer, Dimnus, was implicated in a plot to assassinate Alexander, but took his own life shortly before arrest, unwilling to face trial. The subsequent investigation revealed that Philotas allegedly knew of the plot, but failed to inform Alexander promptly, arousing suspicion of complicity. Distrusting Philotas and fearing his influence within the army, Alexander convened a military tribunal, and Philotas was charged with conspiracy and treason. Under torture, Philotas confessed to treason, although whether this was true or a coerced statement under duress remains unknown. On Alexander's orders, Philotas was stoned to death by his own comrades, serving as a chilling warning to others. But the matter did not end there. Alexander resolved to eliminate anyone who posed a threat. Parmenion, Philotas's father, was at Ecbatana, controlling vast supplies of food and the Macedonian treasury, making him immensely influential. Despite lacking any evidence of his involvement in the conspiracy, Alexander could not risk leaving him alive. He knew that Parmenion, upon learning of his son's execution, might incite a rebellion and rally the disgruntled. To prevent any resistance, Alexander dispatched messengers with forged letters, ostensibly from the king. When the unsuspecting Parmenion met them, he was immediately assassinated. This execution served as a chilling warning to all Macedonian commanders. No one could feel secure or certain of their loyalty. Alexander made it abundantly clear that he would tolerate no dissent, not even from those who had helped him conquer a vast empire and had been his loyal companions. However, following this tragic event, the atmosphere within the army shifted, a rift appearing between Alexander and his soldiers. More and more Macedonians began to see their king not merely as a great general and brilliant strategist, but as a ruthless tyrant, willing to destroy anyone he deemed suspicious, regardless of past service or loyalty. How would Alexander's paranoia and brutality impact subsequent events in the empire? A grueling war in Central Asia and distant India lay ahead, But now his enemies might not only be external foes, but his own soldiers, disillusioned by his policies and ready to revolt at any moment. Following the defeat of Darius III and the fall of Persepolis, Alexander was formally proclaimed the master of Asia, his rule acknowledged across vast territories. Yet his conquest of the Persian Empire was far from complete, and new trials and battles awaited. Eastern satraps and local rulers were slow to acknowledge his authority, and some Persian commanders, including Bessus, Darius's assassin, continued fierce resistance, unwilling to submit to the conqueror. To definitively subdue the East and consolidate his power, Alexander pressed onward into Central Asia, facing arduous campaigns in Bactria and Sogdiana, regions never conquered without protracted and bloody conflict, renowned for their belligerent inhabitants. Bactria, encompassing parts of modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, became a center of resistance to Macedonian rule, uniting all who refused to yield to Alexander. There, Bessus proclaimed himself the new king of Persia, hoping to reunite the Persian lands under his banner and repel the conqueror. However, his authority was precarious, lacking widespread recognition. Many local rulers merely awaited a favorable opportunity to side with the victor, aiming to preserve their domains. Alexander understood that this war would differ from his previous triumphs, demanding new skills and abilities. He would not simply win open battles where his army held numerical superiority, but would have to contend with guerrilla warfare, navigate challenging mountainous terrain, contend with ravaged cities, and overcome the mistrust of a populace weary of war and destruction. The campaign through Bactria and Sogdiana stretched over several long and arduous years, depleting the Macedonian army. The Macedonians encountered fierce resistance from mountain tribes and garrisons entrenched in inaccessible locations, significantly complicating their task. Sogdian ruler Oxyates, one of Bessus's last and most loyal supporters, offered particularly stubborn resistance, refusing to acknowledge Alexander's authority. His fortress, perched atop a high cliff, was considered impregnable. No one believed it could be taken by storm. But Alexander, displaying remarkable feats of military engineering and strategic ingenuity, devised a cunning plan and captured it, showcasing his exceptional military genius. Among the captives taken at the fortress of Oxyates was his daughter, the young and beautiful Roxana, whose beauty, legend says, captivated the conqueror himself, ensnaring his heart. This marriage was a significant political move designed to consolidate Alexander's power in Central Asia. Alexander understood that military dominance alone wouldn't secure lasting control over the East. He needed other avenues of influence. Marrying Roxana, a member of a noble and powerful Bactrian family, allowed him to forge ties with the local aristocracy, gain their trust, and ease tensions between the Macedonians and the conquered peoples, fostering reconciliation. It was a symbolic act, demonstrating that he wasn't merely a plundering conqueror, but a ruler striving to unite East and West to create a new empire. However, this marriage sparked discontent among the Macedonian commanders, who disapproved of Alexander's embrace of Eastern culture. Many felt he was abandoning his roots, adopting Eastern traditions, and neglecting the Macedonian soldiers who had served him faithfully. Furthermore, marrying a barbarian princess seemed strange and unacceptable to the Macedonian nobility, accustomed to dynastic unions within the Hellenic world and unable to comprehend Alexander's motives. Despite this, Alexander continued his integrationist policies, encouraging marriages between his officers and Eastern women, fostering a new elite where Greek and Persian elements would blend, creating a novel culture. His marriage to Roxana was a pivotal step in his policy of building a multinational empire, uniting diverse cultures and peoples. Yet, after Alexander's death, this union played a tragic role in Roxana's fate. She bore him a son, Alexander IV, but in the era of the wars of the Diadochi that followed Alexander's demise, she found herself at the center of a fierce struggle for the throne, becoming a pawn in the hands of ambitious men. Her marriage, intended to unite East and West, ultimately led to her death, as Alexander's successors no longer saw her as a symbol of unity, but as a threat to their ambitions. After conquering Bactria and Sogdiana, Alexander had no remaining rivals in Asia capable of challenging him. He had crushed the last legitimate king of Persia, conquered vast territories from Egypt to Central Asia, and seemed poised to declare himself master of the world, unopposed. But his ambitions extended far beyond this. He refused to rest on his laurels. In the Macedonian king's eyes, the conquest of Persia was merely a stepping stone toward world domination, not the ultimate goal. He saw himself not only as the heir to Achilles and Heracles, but also to the great Eastern rulers, striving to surpass them in glory and power. Before him lay India, an enigmatic and unexplored land, known to the Greeks only through myths and merchants' tales, filled with mystery and wonder. Alexander yearned to reach the edge of the known world, to witness what no one else had, and in the spring of 326 before the Common Era, his army crossed the Indus, beginning a new campaign of conquest destined to immortalize his name. The Indian kings did not constitute a unified state and often warred amongst themselves, simplifying the task for the Macedonians and allowing them to exploit these internal conflicts to their advantage. Alexander quickly subdued several minor principalities, forging alliances with local rulers and augmenting his army with Indian contingents to bolster his numbers. However, he soon encountered a formidable and dangerous opponent, King Porus, ruler of a powerful kingdom on the banks of the Hydaspes River, prepared to repel the invaders. Porus was a skilled and experienced commander, intimately familiar with the terrain and enjoying the support of his people, making him a dangerous adversary. Unlike Alexander's previous foes, Porus possessed a unique advantage unseen by the Macedonians: war elephants, which terrified soldiers with their sheer power and intimidating presence, capable of turning the tide of any battle. The Battle of the Hydaspes became one of the most challenging and bloody of Alexander's career, demanding his utmost effort and strategic brilliance. Porus occupied a strong defensive position across the river, anticipating that the swift, wide current would provide natural protection against a Macedonian attack and allow for easy repulse. However, Alexander, employing his usual tactics of deception and misinformation, feigned a crossing at one point, drawing Porus's attention and forces, then secretly shifted the bulk of his army across the river at night, selecting the most favorable crossing point. What new tactical approaches would Alexander have to employ to defeat the Indian king Porus? As the first rays of dawn illuminated the battlefield, Porus's army faced an unwelcome surprise. Macedonian cavalry had already crossed the river and stood ready for battle. Despite the suddenness of the assault and the enemy's superiority, the Indian army met the foe with incredible resilience and courage, demonstrating their bravery and loyalty to their king. The most serious threat to the Macedonians were the war elephants, which could easily crush the dense ranks of the phalanx or overturn the cavalry, creating panic and destruction. However, Alexander, displaying military ingenuity and a capacity for swift adaptation to changing battle conditions, quickly found a solution and devised an effective counter-tactic against the elephants. He ordered his men to attack the animals from a distance, showering them with a hail of arrows and javelins, targeting their eyes and trunks, the elephants' most vulnerable and sensitive areas, inflicting intense pain. Simultaneously, the cavalry encircled the Indian lines, preventing the elephants from turning and utilizing their full power, restricting their movements. Terrified, wounded, and maddened by pain, the animals went berserk and began trampling their own soldiers, sowing chaos and panic in the Indian army. After several hours of fierce and bloody fighting, Porus's army was broken, suffering tremendous losses, and Porus himself was severely wounded and taken captive. When the captured king, battered and bleeding, was brought before Alexander, the conqueror asked how he should be treated, expecting a plea for mercy. Legend recounts that Porus, maintaining his pride and dignity, proudly replied, "Like a king," displaying his strength of spirit and refusing to debase himself before the victor. This response deeply impressed the Macedonian ruler, striking him with its courage and nobility. Instead of executing or humiliating his enemy, Alexander, admiring his bravery, restored Porus's royal title and even expanded his territory, making him a vassal and ally. This magnanimous gesture further demonstrated that Alexander wasn't merely conquering lands for personal enrichment, but was skilled at winning over conquered rulers, transforming them from enemies into loyal allies. However, despite this victory, which strengthened his power and glorified his name, the Indian campaign marked a turning point in Alexander's career, altering his future plans. The soldiers, having marched thousands of miles and endured countless battles, exhausted and weary from constant warfare, began to express discontent and grumble. When Alexander announced his intention to proceed further east toward the Ganges River, the army, tired of war and hardship, refused to obey his command, unwilling to continue. For the first time in the many years of the campaign, the Macedonian soldiers refused to continue the war, demonstrating defiance toward their king. They were weary of endless campaigns, longing to return home to their families, and the local inhabitants' tales of endless forests and powerful kingdoms ahead only intensified their fear and reluctance to continue the conflict. Alexander, possessing incredible charisma and a gift for persuasion, attempted to convince them, promising new riches and glory, but realized that this time even his eloquence and charm couldn't overcome their fear and exhaustion. Reluctantly and with regret, he acknowledged that the campaign had reached its limit and turned back, abandoning further conquests. Thus ended Alexander the Great's last great expansion, halting his triumphant march across the world. Although he didn't conquer all of India, his eastern campaign became a legendary chapter in history. He proved that even in distant and unfamiliar lands, the Macedonian army and tactics could successfully counter new threats, and his strategy led to the creation of a vast and powerful empire spanning east and west. Yet, returning home, he did not know that this was merely the beginning of the end of his great empire and that new trials awaited him. His army would soon face severe trials and hardships on the return journey, and Alexander himself would never see his native Macedonia again, failing to return home. After years of campaigns, great battles, and countless conquests, Alexander finally returned to Babylon, the city he had made his capital and the center of his new empire, uniting diverse cultures and peoples. In the spring of 324 before the Common Era, he began preparing for another grand expedition, the conquest of the Arabian Peninsula, situated at the crossroads of trade routes. His plans encompassed not only the conquest of new territories and expansion of his empire, but also the extension of trade routes, the construction of new ports, and strengthening control over the eastern Mediterranean, aiming to monopolize trade. Alexander saw Arabia as a strategically vital region, capable of connecting his empire to new wealth and resources, and he dreamed of its conquest. However, these ambitious plans were not destined to be realized. Fate intervened. Just weeks after beginning preparations for the new campaign, the great general fell unexpectedly ill, feeling unwell, and soon passed away, leaving behind numerous questions and mysteries that continue to baffle historians. The final days of Alexander's life are shrouded in mystery and fuel ongoing debate among scholars. According to ancient sources, before his death, he hosted a grand feast in Babylon, inviting his close associates, commanders, and friends, during which he and his companions indulged in revelry, wine, and discussions of future campaigns, making plans for the future. However, soon afterward, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition deteriorated rapidly, leaving him no chance of recovery. Initially, he lost his voice, unable to speak. Then, his strength ebbed, and within days, he could no longer rise from his bed, confined to his sick room. For 12 days, his conditions steadily worsened until, at the age of 32, in the prime of his life, he died without naming an official heir, leaving his vast empire without a ruler. What caused the mysterious and sudden death of the great conqueror? Historians' accounts differ, and there is still no consensus on this matter. One of the most popular and debated hypotheses is that Alexander's death was the result of poisoning, a conspiracy to murder him. Many suspicious circumstances surrounding his death support this theory. His sudden decline after a feast, a prolonged agony marked by speech loss and weakness, and the absence of clear signs of infection suggesting illness. According to this theory, poison could have been slipped into his wine or food. Various groups might have orchestrated the plot, all with reasons to want him dead. Macedonian generals unhappy with his eastern policies, Antipater, the regent of Macedonia, fearing removal from power, or even his mother, Olympias, seeking to eliminate potential rivals for her grandson. However, this theory is countered by the fact that his symptoms developed slowly over several days. Most known poisons of that era acted far more rapidly, leaving no time for deliberation. Another theory points to a fatal illness contracted during one of his campaigns. Ancient sources describe Alexander suffering from fever, weakness, abdominal pain, and progressive debilitation, all indicative of a serious disease. Modern scholars suggest malaria, typhoid fever, or a viral infection contracted during his long campaigns through tropical regions as possibilities. The high mortality rate among his soldiers who shared Alexander's conditions lends credence to this theory. There is also a hypothesis that Alexander's death stemmed from an autoimmune disease. Some researchers suggest he may have suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder causing paralysis and the gradual failure of vital bodily functions, ultimately leading to death. The fact that his body reportedly did not decompose for several days after death, an unusual occurrence, supports this theory. This could be attributed to severe dehydration and circulatory problems caused by the disease. In any case, Alexander's sudden and mysterious death brought an end to his grand plans and ambitions, leaving behind a vast empire that soon plunged into chaos and disintegration, unable to withstand the test of time. Without a clearly designated heir, his generals, the Diadochi, engaged in a fierce power struggle to control the empire, resulting in its fragmentation among various rulers who failed to maintain its unity. Thus ended the vibrant and eventful era of the great conqueror. Yet a new era of Hellenism began, in which his legacy, despite the difficulties, continued to thrive in the culture, science, and politics of centuries to come, profoundly influencing the development of civilization. After Alexander the Great's death, his body became the focus not only of veneration and worship, but also of fierce political maneuvering among his successors vying for power. The great conqueror died without leaving an official heir, fueling discord and war. His generals, the Diadochi, launched a bitter struggle for dominance, each seeking to control as much of the empire as possible. Equally important to them, however, was the question of where the great king should be buried, as this carried immense symbolic weight. In the ancient world, the burial place of a great ruler held sacred significance. Possession of their remains symbolized legitimate authority and a claim to the throne. Alexander's body became a symbol of his empire's legacy, and each of his associates sought to control its fate, using it for political gain. According to Macedonian tradition, deceased kings were buried in their homeland, in the capital city of Aigai, Vergina, where the tombs of the Argead dynasty rulers, his ancestors, were located. Initially, Alexander's body was prepared for transport to Macedonia for burial in his homeland. It was meticulously embalmed, placed in a lavish golden sarcophagus, and set within a ceremonial chariot specially constructed for transporting the remains of the great king. However, this plan was thwarted. Alexander's body never returned to his native land. During the transport of the remains, one of the most influential Diadochi, Ptolemy, in a decisive and cunning move, intercepted the funeral procession and transported the sarcophagus to Egypt to bolster his own power. This was not merely the seizure of a body, it was a carefully calculated strategic maneuver designed to solidify Ptolemy's rule. He understood that possessing Alexander's remains would strengthen his position as ruler of Egypt, lending legitimacy to his reign and attracting supporters of Alexander. He brought the body to Memphis, one of Egypt's largest and oldest cities, where it remained for several years, enjoying immense veneration. Later, his successors moved the sarcophagus to the new capital founded by Alexander himself, Alexandria, a city that became the center of the Hellenistic world. Burial in Alexandria made Alexander's tomb a place of pilgrimage, attracting visitors from across the globe. His sarcophagus became a sacred object, drawing pilgrims, rulers, and philosophers alike to honor the great conqueror and touch upon his greatness. Many Roman emperors, admiring Alexander, visited his tomb, either to pay homage to the great general or to secure his symbolic support, demonstrating their connection to a glorious past. Julius Caesar, upon arriving in Egypt, is known to have visited Alexander's sarcophagus first, to pay his respects. Octavian Augustus, upon becoming emperor, also visited the tomb and even touched Alexander's embalmed body. Legend claims he accidentally broke off a piece of his nose, causing a commotion. Later, Emperor Septimius Severus ordered the tomb closed to the public to prevent vandalism and desecration, while Caracalla, an admirer of Alexander, donated his toga, rings, and weapons to the sarcophagus as a token of respect. Despite such renown and veneration, over time, the traces of Alexander's tomb gradually vanished, disappearing from historical records and remaining an enigma for historians and archaeologists. What happened to Alexander's tomb? One theory suggests that it was destroyed by the catastrophic earthquakes that repeatedly shook Alexandria, obliterating many historical monuments. Another suggests that the sarcophagus may have been relocated or hidden during early Christianity, when pagan shrines were targeted for destruction and desecration. Some researchers propose that the remains of the sarcophagus might have been used in the construction of new buildings in Alexandria or even Cairo, a common practice at the time. To this day, the precise location of Alexander the Great's tomb remains unknown, continuing to be one of antiquity's greatest mysteries. For centuries, archaeologists and historians have searched, hoping to discover the tomb of the great general, but without success. Several possible sarcophagi that might have belonged to the Macedonian king have been found in Alexandria, but none has provided a definitive answer, and the mystery remains unsolved. Perhaps his mausoleum still lies hidden beneath the modern streets of the city, awaiting its moment to once again reveal one of antiquity's greatest secrets, destined to be discovered sooner or later. The death of Alexander the Great marked the beginning of the end for his vast empire, built at the cost of incredible effort and conquest. The conquests, seemingly solid and unshakable during his lifetime, began to crumble rapidly once the figure of the ruler who held everything together disappeared. Although Alexander created a massive empire stretching from the Balkans to India, he left no clear and concise plan for succession, naming no heir. In his final days, when asked to whom he bequeathed his dominion, he reportedly uttered the enigmatic phrase, "to the most worthy," without specifying whom he meant. This cryptic statement proved fatal, initiating a bitter power struggle among his generals, the Diadochi, each believing themselves to be the most worthy, leading to the empire's disintegration. The problem lay in the fact that Alexander's vast empire lacked a clear and stable governing structure capable of functioning without a strong leader. He was, above all, a brilliant military commander and possessed incredible personal authority that unified peoples, armies, and elites. But he failed to create effective administrative institutions. He left local rulers in place, but did not establish strong, centralized administrative institutions capable of operating without his personal oversight, a serious problem after his death. Following his sudden death, everything rested on military strength and personal loyalty. The generals, accustomed to their personal allegiance to Alexander, were unwilling to submit to one another, each striving for sole power. Formally, power passed to his young son, Alexander IV, and his half-brother, Aridaeus, Philip III, but both were weak and incompetent, lacking experience and influence, and incapable of realistically governing the vast empire. The Diadochi, the most influential and ambitious military commanders, became the true masters of the situation, each vying for power. A tragic era of the Wars of the Diadochi ensued, lasting nearly half a century and filled with bloody battles and intrigue. Soon, the vast empire Alexander had forged fractured into several large, warring states, constantly vying for expansion. Ptolemy consolidated his power in Egypt, establishing a dynasty that ruled for 3 more centuries, leaving a significant mark on history. Seleucus controlled the vast eastern provinces, founding the great Seleucid Empire that stretched as far as India. Antigonus and his descendants held on to Macedonia and parts of Asia Minor, striving to maintain control over Alexander's homeland. Each of these states attempted to portray itself as the sole legitimate heir to Alexander, but in reality, they fought amongst themselves more than they worked to restore a unified empire, consumed by wars and conspiracies. It's fascinating to note that even after his death, Alexander's image continued to play a pivotal role in the political landscape of the Hellenistic world, profoundly influencing its culture and art. Many of his successors, the Diadochi, sought to associate themselves with him, emulating his leadership style, minting coins bearing his likeness, and proclaiming themselves his rightful heirs to consolidate their power. In Egypt, Alexander was revered as a god, and the Ptolemies leveraged this cult to strengthen their rule, constructing temples in his honor and bestowing divine tributes upon him. In Asia Minor and the East, his persona was perceived as the ideal ruler, a wise and just leader who unified Greek and Eastern traditions. Centuries later, Roman emperors like Julius Caesar and Octavian Augustus also sought to emulate Alexander, viewing him as the epitome of greatness and striving to match his accomplishments. Thus, although his empire crumbled almost immediately after his death, his legacy proved far more enduring than his state. Alexander not only redrew the map of the world, but also laid the foundation for Hellenistic civilization, an era that witnessed the spread of Greek culture, language, and science across vast territories, creating a unique synthesis of East and West that profoundly impacted the development of world culture. What if he had lived longer, not succumbing to an untimely death at such a young age? This question remains one of history's most intriguing enigmas, endlessly captivating historians. Perhaps he would have reached the edge of the known world, conquering Arabia and Carthage, uniting the globe under his dominion. Or maybe he would have faced a new wave of fierce resistance and internal conspiracies, ultimately leading to the demise of his empire. One thing remains certain: his continued reign would have further solidified the influence of Hellenism in the East and West, possibly even leading to the creation of a strong, centralized world empire under a single ruler, thus altering the course of history. Alexander the Great's legacy is immeasurable and will endure for ages to come. He inspired Roman generals, Napoleon Bonaparte, and modern military leaders, influencing military strategy. His tactics are still studied in military academies worldwide, and his image remains the embodiment of the ideal conqueror, a man who challenged the world and succeeded in conquering it, reaching unprecedented heights. Yet, his story serves as a cautionary tale for future generations. Even the mightiest empire cannot solely rely on the personal strength and charisma of a single individual. Alexander left behind a world he transformed, but ultimately could not sustain due to a lack of a clear succession plan and robust administrative institutions. And still, he remains an eternal symbol of ambition, genius, and an indomitable pursuit of greatness, inspiring people for centuries. Alexander the Great died before reaching 33, but his name proved immortal, transcending the ages. He didn't just conquer vast territories, he changed the world, creating an empire that, though it disintegrated shortly after his death, permanently altered the political map and cultural landscape of the ancient world, influencing the subsequent development of civilization. Alexander remains the quintessential conqueror because no one else achieved such monumental success in so short a time, transforming a small Macedonian kingdom into a mighty empire spanning 3 continents and etching its name into history. His campaigns were not mere conquests driven by plunder and violence. They were a catalyst for the dissemination of Hellenic culture, language, philosophy, and science, laying the foundation for Hellenism, which profoundly impacted the course of human history, spreading knowledge and new ideas. What if he had lived longer, and what further achievements awaited him? This unanswered question will forever intrigue historians. Perhaps he would have reached the limits of the known world, conquering Arabia and Carthage, forging a single global empire. Or perhaps he would have faced a new wave of fierce resistance and internal conspiracies that would have undone all his efforts. But one thing is certain: his continued reign would have further entrenched the influence of Hellenism, and the world would be profoundly different. Alexander's legacy is beyond measure, and his name will live on through the ages. He inspired Roman generals, Napoleon, and modern military leaders, profoundly influencing military strategy and tactics. His tactics are still studied today, and his image remains the embodiment of the ideal conqueror. Yet, his story also serves as a warning, highlighting the fragility of conquest. What, then, can we learn from the history of the greatest conqueror? Despite his flaws and mistakes, he remains an enduring symbol of untamed ambition, unparalleled genius, and an insatiable thirst for greatness, inspiring people for millennia. After Alexander the Great's death, his image not only persisted in the collective memory of nations, but also took on legendary qualities, transforming into a myth passed down through generations. He became more than a historical figure, evolving into a symbol surrounded by myths and legends that migrated from one era to another, acquiring new nuances and meanings. To some, he was the ideal ruler, a wise and just conqueror. To others, a divine messenger whose arrival and campaigns altered the world's destiny, shaping its future course. In medieval texts, his image transformed, becoming part of epic tales, chivalric romances, and even religious traditions, acquiring the attributes of a hero worthy of admiration. One of the most intriguing and fascinating aspects of Alexander's posthumous cult is his image in Islamic tradition, where he is known as Zul-Qarnayn, meaning two-horned, endowed with immense power. This title is mentioned in the Quran, where Zul-Qarnayn is described as a righteous and just king who traveled the earth and built a wall protecting people from the savage and bloodthirsty tribes of Gog and Magog, bringing peace and security. While the Quran does not directly name Alexander, many medieval Muslim historians, including Al-Tabari and Ibn Khaldun, associated him with this character, seeing in him the embodiment of the ideal ruler. The epithet two-horned may be linked to depictions of Alexander in Hellenistic art, where he is often shown wearing a horned helmet or with horns symbolizing his connection to the god Zeus Ammon, lending him divine majesty. In medieval Europe, Alexander became a central figure in chivalric romances and legends, celebrating his valor and wisdom. Latin chronicles and the Romance of Alexander attributed to him incredible feats, fantastical adventures, and even encounters with monsters and magicians, further enhancing his heroic image. These texts portray him as the ideal king, warrior, and sage, a man who explored the world, ventured into uncharted territories, and strived for eternal glory through his exploits. Some versions of the legend even claim he attempted to reach the heavens in a chariot pulled by griffins, only to be stopped by the gods, a reminder of his mortality and the limitations of human ambition. In Russia and Eastern Europe, Alexander's image also held a special place, becoming a symbol of greatness. In the 17th and 18th centuries, he was viewed as the ideal ruler, often compared to Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, prominent Russian rulers. In Russian history, he became a symbol of national grandeur and military might, and his military strategies were studied as examples of exceptional military genius worthy of emulation. In Asia, his name was revered as the epitome of a great king who not only conquered territories but also built civilizations, spreading knowledge and culture. In Iran, his image was perceived ambivalently, on one hand as the destroyer of the Persian Empire, but on the other as a figure later incorporated into the Shahnameh epic, where he is mentioned as Iskander, possessing positive attributes. The image of Alexander the Great continued to evolve and transform throughout the centuries, acquiring new facets. He became a universal symbol of power, ambition, and knowledge, encompassing both East and West, and continuing to inspire people to great achievements. Each culture found something in him that resonated deeply. The Greeks saw him as their ideal hero, Muslims as a just king, and Europeans as a great knight who conquered the world. Alexander the Great died before reaching the age of 33, yet his name proved immortal, surviving the ages. He didn't merely conquer vast territories, he changed the world, creating an empire that, though it dissolved soon after his death, irrevocably altered the political map and cultural landscape of the ancient world, profoundly influencing the subsequent development of humanity. Alexander remains the ultimate symbol of conquest because no one else achieved such sweeping success in so short a span, transforming a small Macedonian kingdom into an empire encompassing 3 continents and securing a place in history. His campaigns were not mere conquests driven by plunder and violence. They served as a powerful force for the dissemination of Hellenic culture, language, philosophy, and science, laying the foundation for Hellenism, which profoundly influenced the course of human history, spreading knowledge and new ideas. What if he had lived longer, and what further accomplishments awaited him? This unanswerable question will continue to fascinate historians. Perhaps he truly would have reached the edge of the known world, conquering Arabia and Carthage, creating a unified global empire. Or perhaps he would have encountered a new wave of fierce resistance and internal conspiracies that would have undone all his achievements. But one thing is certain: his continued rule would have further solidified the influence of Hellenism, and the world would have been drastically different. Alexander's legacy is immeasurable, and his name will endure through the ages. He inspired Roman generals, Napoleon, and modern military leaders, profoundly influencing military strategy and tactics. His tactics are still studied today, and his image remains the embodiment of the ideal conqueror.